Hi, it's Miss Ciara, and I am here to tell you the story of knowing Jesus in a new way. Are you ready? When we started this story last week, we heard all about how the women saw the empty tomb. And then we heard about the second week of Easter, when we remember the road to Emmaus and how the two discovered Jesus in the breaking of the bread. On the third Sunday of Easter, we remember when Thomas had the doubt leaving his bones as he saw Jesus and touched the wounds in his hand. On the fourth Sunday of Easter, we remember when the disciples went to Galilee, just as Jesus had told them. Galilee is some 80 miles from Jerusalem, and it took them about 4 days to walk there. Many of the disciples were from Galilee and went to the Sea of Galilee, where they went fishing as children with their fathers. They were home. A few of the disciples got into a boat to go fishing. They heard the sound of the wind fill the sails. They fished all night and caught nothing. In the morning, as the sky turned from bright pink to blue, Peter noticed someone standing on the shoreline near the fire. The stranger called out to them, "Have you caught anything?" "No," they answered. The stranger said, "Throw your net to the other side of the boat." They shrugged, but did as they were told. The net filled with fish. John turned to Peter and said, "It is the Lord." Peter jumped out of the boat and began to swim toward shore. The stranger called out again, "Come, I'll fix you breakfast. Bring the fish with you." There were too many fish in the net to get them into the boat, and so they dragged the net behind them. When they got to shore, they saw fish was already cooking on the fire. They knew the stranger was Jesus, but they were afraid to say anything. The stranger gave them fish and bread to eat, and they talked. Then Jesus said to Peter, "Do you love me?" "Yes," Peter said. "Then feed my sheep." He asked again, "Do you love me?" "Yes, I do." "Tend my flock." "Do you love me?" "Yes, you know I do." "Then feed my sheep." Then Jesus disappeared. On the fifth Sunday in Easter, we remember when the disciples met Jesus in Galilee on the top of a hill. They were still getting used to knowing Jesus in this new way. Listen. He was speaking. Can you hear? "All authority is given unto me on heaven and on earth." What is he talking about? Then Jesus said something the disciples did understand, but did not want to hear. Go everywhere. Tell my story to everyone, even this part. Baptize people in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This was too hard. He was asking too much. They had to go too far. Then Jesus disappeared. As the disciples were walking back, they couldn't help but think. First, they had been followers, but now they had to be leaders. They were sheep. Now they had to be shepherds. They were home in Galilee for the last time. Now they had to make home for others. On the 6th Sunday of Easter, we remember when the disciples were back in Jerusalem. They were gathered again in their room with Jesus. Now they were comfortable with Jesus in this new way and began to ask him all kinds of questions, even foolish ones. Then Jesus led them out of the city walls into the hills, close to Bethany. Jesus stretched out his hand, looked them each in the eye, and blessed each one of them. Then Jesus was carried up into a cloud and disappeared. The disciples stared, looking up where he had been. Suddenly, they heard a voice ask, "What are you looking at?" They turned and saw two men dressed in white. They felt so silly. What were they looking at? What had been there wasn't anymore. Then the strangers answered their own questions. Jesus is no longer with you. He has ascended. And so, as the disciples walked back to Jerusalem, they began to wonder, what would happen now? Where was the Holy Spirit that Jesus had talked about? When was it going to come? And so they waited. As they waited, God guided them to Matthias, who would be the 12th disciple to replace Judas. And so they were 12 again. And together, they waited for the Holy Spirit. Next Sunday will be Pentecost. On Pentecost, we remember the first Pentecost. It's when summer first appears, things are in bloom, grasses are green, and the wheat sprouts up. Also, Jews from all over came to Jerusalem to remember the 50 days after Passover when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. The city was full of life. The 12 disciples were in an upper room, perhaps the same room they were with Jesus that last night. They were together talking and praying. Suddenly, a great wind burst through the windows and filled the house. Fire danced around them, and it even felt like fire was on their tongues. They began speaking, and they were so happy and joyful, they burst out onto the streets. And although they seemed to be talking nonsense, everyone understood them. Some people thought they were drunk. Peter, who was more calm and composed than he typically was, said to them, "They have not had anything to drink. After all, it is only morning. It is like the prophet Joel said, 'God will come down to us, and sons and daughters will prophesy. The old will dream dreams.'" And people continued to walk by and celebrate, but some stopped and were baptized. The Holy Spirit came down to them. Somewhere, the dove that was nearby when Jesus was baptized must have been there that day, smiling. For this was another kind of baptism, but not a baptism with water. This was a baptism of fire.